Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the short story Pattern for Survival, written by Richard Matheson in 1955. This short story first appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and the editor at the time was Anthony Boucher. Pattern for Survival is a very short story. It is about 3 pages long, and within that 3 pages, Pattern for Survival has a lot to say about the human condition. And this is one of the great beauties of science fiction. Science fiction enables you to take a situation like this story and mine for gold. Pattern for Survival is a handy title for this short story, as it was also the title of a 1950 short film put out by the U.S. government and the civil defense for what steps you should take to prepare yourself in order to survive for an imminent nuclear attack. And at the time, this was almost considered a certainty by everybody. There was quite a Red Scare going on, and the anticipation of a nuclear holocaust was always right around the corner. One of the interesting things that the story posits is, how would you behave if you were one of the survivors of a nuclear holocaust? I came across this Richard Matheson short story while I was perusing the website Science Fiction and Other Suspect Ruminations, and it's a site that I've been going to for years. It's absolutely one of my favorites. And it is run by Joachim Boaz. And Joachim has really insightful, very interesting reviews of science fiction short stories and novels. And there is also art collected on the site and some other commentary. And I find, pound for pound, it is one of the best review sites for science fiction, and also a great place for gaining an understanding of the science fiction that you're reading from 1945 to 1985. That's about the time frame that Joachim has laid down for his area of study and interest. So if you find that time frame of science fiction interesting, you just can't go wrong with this website. And as I said, it is my favorite review site and has been for years. Also, one of the great things about the site is that if you go down through the comments, many of the people who do commentary and share their thoughts and feelings about the reviews and the works reviewed have their own review sites. And so, you can do some really great click-through to other people who review science fiction and fantasy there. So I recommend that. There's a great deal of exploration to be had at Science Fiction and Other Suspect Ruminations. And I will provide a link down in the description of this video. And I do hope that you go and check it out, because it really is one of the best of its kind on the internet. And I know that it has really helped me to become book poor, because there's so much good stuff recommended there that I'm always running off and buying something after I go there. Now, I feel a little bit out of my league talking about this story, only because in comparison to Joachim Boaz, who is a PhD, I'm going to have a hard time measuring up, I think, intellectually speaking. So I will say, right off the bat that Joachim's review of this short story is a definite source material for anything that I would have to say about it too. And he did a short review of it. I mean, it's a 3-page short story. So really, you would think I would do a short review of it too. But of course, if you've seen my other reviews, you know that I can turn a 3-page short story into a 20-minute discussion. So here we go. As the story opens, Richard Allen Shagley is just finishing up the writing of a short story, and he's having a really good moment with the finishing of the story. And that is described in interesting detail, and there's interesting metaphors used for what he's experiencing and going through as he does that. And then there's the repeating theme, or the repeating commentary of the character noticing the disarray around him, the destruction around him. He notices damage in the wall, there's damage in the ceiling where he lives. The carpet is described as soaked, different things like that. There's some really great visual dialogue of him kind of curling his fingers, curling his hands, which reminded me of like the edges of a mushroom cloud. There's references to why did the designers call it a mushroom cloud and not a toadstool, different things like that. So when he finishes it, there's also a unique piece of history there in the finishing of the story, in that he has to get it ready to be mailed. And before the use of email for submitting short stories, you had to wrap it up with a self-addressed stamped envelope. You had to get it all ready and properly formatted and presented, and then you get all that kind of like care package of your writing together and then send that off to the editor. So he gets that all ready, and I just thought it was interesting that the author took the time, even in a story this short, to describe that process. And then he kind of shuffles and shambles down to the mailbox. And so it's obvious that he's damaged. The descriptions lead you to believe that there are things going on, that all is not quite well with this world. He walks around an enormous hole in the ground, and while it's never called Ground Zero, and I don't necessarily know that it is Ground Zero in the story, I just let my mind kind of take me there because it was described as having pipes and all kinds of other stuff sticking out of it. And so I thought, wow, is he that close to the blast zone? That's fascinating. That would also be, remarkably dangerous for his health. And that is actually described in the story because his health is not going so well. Actually, nobody's health is going so well in this story. The thud of the manuscript landing in the bottom of the mailbox is described. It's, I thought, a beautiful little detail for writing a short story. The story shifts to another character. It shifts to the mailman. And the mailman is very happy to see that there's a Shagley story in there, and he feels a point of pride that he has something to do with delivering it. So we now know that there are at least two people in this damaged world, and everybody in this world finds themselves thinking about and commenting on the state of disarray and when are they going to fix those things. So from there, the story moves from the mailman to the first reader at a magazine, I suppose, or somewhere, someone who is going to do editorial and printing work on it. As they're doing that, the state of disarray of everything around them is described as they are also very happy to have gotten a Shagley story. But isn't it amazing that a 3-page short story has already got me reading into it this much? I mean, that is solidly the work of a genius. The story makes it past the first editor, of course, and is then going to be forwarded on to, I guess, the chief editor. It moves on to the guy who does the typesetting and the printing. And each of these people are described, and there's maybe the hint of damage, radiation sickness, scabrous wounds on a balding head, which would be, of course, a direct, clear sign of radiation poisoning, although the term radiation poisoning is never used in the story. There's so much to glean from the story of each of these sad characters who are in this unhealthy state and yet so consumed by the process of writing the story, accepting the story, editing the story. Not too much, it's already perfect, right? That's a writer's dream come true, I would imagine. To not have an editor need to do anything to your story. And, that would be almost like having a superpower as a writer, because that never happens. You have a typesetter who's so happy to be typesetting the work of a guy who he considers to be one of the greats. As the story winds up, the main character, Richard Shagley, finds the last copy of a magazine that has his story printed in it that same day. The guy who was doing the typesetting needed to get it out by a certain time so that it could hit the stands by 6 o'clock or 6:15. And shortly after that, Shagley finds it and picks it up. And he's got the only copy, and he takes it home. And when he gets home, he starts taking off all of the various things that he has carried with him, the mailman's satchel, a pair of gloves, other things that he would have worn as an office worker. And he neatly arranges all those things and puts them all aside. And that's the end of his day. He's no longer the mailman. He's no longer the typesetter. He's no longer any of those things, but he's living in this self-perpetuating circle of creation and appreciation and survival, because the entirety of his existence has been destroyed. As a human being, what he has done is he has retreated into this pattern that allows him to survive, just like you would do. I could tell you every single scene of this story, every single one of them in minute detail, without actually reading it to you, and you would still gain the world by reading it. This is an amazingly well-written story, and without actually reading it to you, you still have the great discovery laying ahead of you of actually reading Richard Matheson's prose, which is just gifted, is the best way to describe it. This story is a masterpiece. told in 3 pages. So the really cool thing about that is it's a masterpiece you can read over and over and probably get something out of it every time you read it. As this story comes around to its final scene, Shagley is awakening in the morning to repeat the process again and start a new story, which is a prequel to the last story that he just sold and verified and typeset and printed for himself. We're left to assume that he'll do it all again tomorrow and the next day, and that he has locked himself into this, I would say, bubble of existence, this mouse wheel, as it were, that he will run on for what for him will be eternity, but he's dying of radiation sickness, obviously, so it's not going to be that long. For a long time, science fiction has really enjoyed the post-apocalyptic yarn, right? There's all kinds of great post-apocalyptic stuff. Moyd over at Media Death Cult likes to say, you know, I fucking love the end of the world. And people really do. Post-apocalyptic stories of all different kinds, and you know, with that whole theme is very popular in science fiction and has been for a long time. I've enjoyed many of John Wyndham's cozy catastrophes, but what Matheson is saying in this story is your post-apocalyptic visions, whatever they may be, this is what they're going to really be. If you find yourself in a horrible shit situation where you have survived a nuclear war, living in the middle of a massive city like New York City or Chicago, or wherever you want to think about it, the only thing you're going to have left is the landscape within you. It's the only territory you're going to be able to control, and it's the only place you're going to want to be as you fall apart from radiation sickness. This short story doesn't glamorize the post-apocalypse. This short story doesn't glamorize surviving a nuclear war or what it would be like after a major disaster like that. This is yet another great example of Richard Matheson's uncanny ability to tap into the human condition with extreme empathy and skill. And he does it all in 3 pages. It is incredibly poignant when you get to the very end of the story and you realize that this was all Shagley, and this poor lonely guy is in this world that is decaying and falling apart, and he is also decaying and falling apart. It is a bleak and honest portrayal of the wasteland, because let's be honest, if you ever found yourself in a post-apocalyptic situation, you found yourself trying to survive in the wasteland, you're probably not going to be with an elite band of badasses driving around in handmade cars fighting battles. No, if you find yourself in the wasteland is probably going to defeat you.